Alright, so before we get into what'll likely be 15 straight minutes of me screaming into a microphone, I gotta talk shop with you guys. As you may have heard, new regulations have made YouTube a relatively shaky platform to make a living off of. Well, more shaky than usual is probably more accurate. The rule has always been content like mine will always make less money than your average family-friendly stuff, but now on top of that, anything seen as remotely family-friendly but not listed as such runs the risk of bringing down a $40,000 fine from the FTC, an amount of money I've never even seen all at once before. So if there was ever a time to support content you enjoy, it's now. I have my Patreon linked here on screen and in the description, and if you think independent game reviews with a focus on retro video on original hardware is worth $1 a month, well, I'd sure appreciate it. If for whatever reason you can't or don't want to throw some support my way, maybe think about doing it for someone else you enjoy. I guarantee you they likely need it more than you know. And for those of you that can't for any reason at all, thank you anyways. You guys have brought me feelings of satisfaction I never dreamed of, and I love you all for it. So with that in mind, enough shilling, let's dive face first into this turd. Well guys, we have made it to the video a lot of you have been waiting for. The Silent Hill HD collection is world-renowned for its terrible quality. Stories of its corner-cutting, bad decisions, and flat-out incomplete nature of its final product have been told far and wide. But have you had the courage to jump in and see this disaster for yourself? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I've never touched this accursed box. That is until today. Yep, I dirtied my hands with this abomination to finally figure out exactly what was done wrong here and what, if anything, could have been done to save it. And for those of you looking to save a bit of watch time, I will not be taking on the entire internet and singing this remaster's praises. This collection is exactly as bad as you've heard. The goal today is just to explain exactly why that is, and hell, maybe figure out what led to all this madness. So strap in, SH fans, and make sure to keep an eye on the newcomers. This is going to be an incredibly bumpy ride. So, last chance to chicken out. No? Alright everybody, welcome to Silent Hill. Silent Hill, a series that started a bit of a revolution. It led the way for games that were looking to deliver a more visceral horror experience. Yeah, for a while Silent Hill was a trusted name that assured a certain quality of design, but nothing lasts forever, and sadly after SH4, Konami saw fit to break the band up. Team Silent, the group of misfits that had issues following orders and shared a creative vision of how horror games should work, were no more, and the Big K wanted other developers to get a shot at the franchise. And regardless of how you feel about that decision, the fact of the matter is, core fans of the original games felt cheated. The series and sometimes characters that they loved were being used in ways the original creators would have never stood for. Of course, it turned out there would be no shiny new graphics, as this was more of a remaster than an HD collection, which brought up a few issues. Sure, a 16:9 aspect ratio and a higher operating resolution were nothing to sneeze at, but a lot of us were already experiencing these modern comforts with the PC versions of 2 and 3. You know, the versions that were already capable of all these things. And that wasn't even the worst issue. This so-called collection wasn't anywhere near complete. Only Silent Hills 2 and 3 would be included, and if the goal was to make money off of series nostalgia, why not include the game that started it all? Well, the answer to that was pretty obvious on its face. They would have had to have remade the original PS1 game if they wanted it to share the same HD look as the other two, which was understandable but still a bitter pill to swallow. And then they would go on to contradict even this idea by not including the other PS2 release in the series, Silent Hill 4. So no matter how you look at it, fans were getting screwed one way or another. And all of this was just some of the drama that went down before the game hit shelves. The real chaos that is this game's existence wouldn't be clear until it was spinning in 360s and PS3s around the world. And from here I want to lay out some ground rules. First off, we will absolutely be comparing these so-called remasters to the source material. I know some people would want these games judged based on their own performance, even though they would fail that metric too, But these are adaptations, so we're going to treat them like any other port of a beloved franchise here on Avalanche Reviews, and that means scrutinizing the absolute shit out of them. Second, the footage will be coming from the PS3 version of the games with no patches applied. Now, I know there were some issues fixed with a patch eventually, but most people who played these games had to play them for months and months in this state, and my goal here is to analyze the product of their work and not their last-minute rushed patch job. And with that out of the way, alright, let's dive in.
Torn flesh, smashed bones, spattered blood.
First and foremost, we have to deal with the presentation side of things. Now, I know what you're thinking. What could be wrong with the graphics? Isn't this just the original games but up-resed? And in a perfect world, that's exactly what it would be. But we're not living in that world. We're living in a world where Konami would give the go-ahead to start an HD remaster project after they had lost the source code to the games being remastered, and a company with zero knowledge of breaking down and recreating a game in higher resolutions would sign up to be the ones to do it. So what we ended up with was a plethora of inaccuracies and differences, all piled on top of a solid core of graphical nonsense. Now, those of you who watched my video on Silent Hill 2 will know Team Silent worked very hard on a real-time lighting engine. In fact, I'd say it was one of the best looking features of the game, second only to the drop-dead gorgeous cutscenes, a subject we will definitely be talking about shortly. But as you know, the way the real-time lighting was implemented turned into a real source of frustration when porting SH2 to other platforms, mostly because it was achieved by utilizing the PS2's hardware in very interesting and mostly out-of-spec ways that wouldn't translate to other tech very easily. So, how did Hijinks handle this very delicate and technically involving process? Well, that's easy. They broke the absolute hell out of it. See here in this cutscene, the shadows cast by the bars cut off at the top, and at another area in the Woodside Apartments, you can see the dark clearing out like a fog of war in an RTS game. But I think we both know those aren't the only examples to talk about. Shadows are totally broken across the board, as seen here where some seriously messed up stuff is going on with these shelves. It's clear that zero amounts of time went into bug testing this problem, since the example with the bars is in the first 20 minutes of the game. Playtesters had to have seen this issue, which wouldn't be the only problem so early in the game. Silent Hill 2 also suffers from a real odd issue with its pillarboxing. Now, I know some people think the pillar boxes should be there and others think it looks better without them, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure what side of that conflict I'm on, but I am sure Hijinks should have definitely picked one, because they come and go, sometimes even within the same scene. Make sure to keep your eyes on the black bars on the top and bottom of the screen and witness as the game decides to ditch and bring them back over and over again. Once again, this shows the exact level of care put into these remasters. This cutscene is in the first 10 minutes of gameplay. Either this means no one noticed the obvious issue here, or they didn't find it important enough to fix. And to be completely honest, both options are equally damning, since project lead Tom Hewlett claims he petitioned Konami for this idea on the grounds of him being a Silent Hill superfan. And you know how I can prove that's not the case? Silent Hill's fog, the one thing that defines the series, the one thing that must be done right, is an absolute mess in this collection. With both games, the fog is much lighter and less thick than the originals, sometimes not showing up at all. Hell, there are points where it's so thin that you're able to see things you weren't meant to, like here in this cutscene where you can actually see the boundaries of the map and where they terminate into nothing. Of course, if you're not mega familiar with the originals, you might not notice some of this, but I'm confident you'll notice the hard line that is the fog's boundaries. I mean, look at this, it's so poorly done you can actually see the line where the fog is drawn in. I probably shouldn't have to mention this, but this is not how it looks in the originals. I would also sometimes get an issue where fog would interact with other stuff in the background, creating this big bright ball of white light. And sadly, this level of incompetence was not limited to Silent Hill 2 by a long shot. Yes, the very best game in the series, in my opinion, got the same lazy, destructive treatment as Part 2. The first thing I was really able to notice in Heather's little romp through self-realization are the incredibly hard edges found on shadows. This tells me they didn't just scale up the original lighting effects, since here in the original we can see that shadows have had their edges softened, which makes them look more real and convincing compared to the razor-sharp edges on the HD collection. And getting back to the fog again, all of it is missing from this intro scene. Now, what possible reason could there have been to not include such a key aspect of this game's visual style? Well, other than laziness, of course. And moving back to Silent Hill 2, we have to get into the absolute terrible job these guys did with that game's biggest selling point. Back in the day, these 60 field per second cutscenes were the talk of the industry, and for good reason. Their smooth, fluid motion and incredibly detailed look are still impressive today, but sadly that is not the case with the remaster. For some reason, instead of grabbing the PS2 originals and working some up conversion / progressive scan magic on them, Hijinks just snagged the 30 frame per second highly compressed cutscenes from the Xbox version of the game and proceeded to shit all over them. In order to get these CGs running at a faux 60 frames per second, these absolute monsters added interpolated frames in between each real frame of video. And what I mean by that is every other frame is a composite of the previous and next frame blurred together. This leads to a blurry overall look and an insane amount of ghosting. Which is the craziest part of all this, because these fools went through all of this effort to get 60 FPS versions of these cutscenes working, instead of just ripping the gorgeous PS2 originals that already ran at that frame rate. Sure, 60 interlace fields per second is not the same as 60 progressive scan frames per second, but are you telling me my $300 FrameMeister can deinterlace and upconvert these videos just fine, but the hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment at Hijinks' disposal can't? Without a doubt, this is the most confusing and infuriating aspect we've covered so far, and fair warning, it's only going to get worse from here. It's also worth noting there's no longer an option to turn on sharp display mode in Part 3, but the game's so sharp there's really no need for it anymore. And this is where, in the name of fairness, I do have to give some compliments. So let's hurry up and get this over with. Both games actually look quite good given the HD treatment, or at least they do in some select scenarios. Some of you may have noticed that I'm actually playing Part 2 with the static filter on, and that's because it looks really good. My main issue with the original game's static was the individual grains were too large and it obscured how great the game could look normally, but the implementation here is damn near perfect. Looking at the options side by side, and trust me it does hurt to say this, the HD collection takes the win here. And in another odd victory, Hijinks replaced the lossy pre-rendered cutscene at the start of Silent Hill 3 with actual in-game graphics. Now I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but this video always stood out since it was the only one in the game that was pre-rendered, and it was done so at a very high compression rate, so it didn't look very good. This is pretty out of character for Team Hijinks, as their modus operandi so far has been to do the least amount of work humanly possible, but they actually had to grab the scenes present in this pre-render from the in-game cutscenes, which is probably the most amount of effort I've seen in this remaster so far. Not that it's very much, mind you. Also of note are some 2D assets that seem to have either been redrawn or replaced with higher res originals. Now, it's worth saying that not everything got this treatment, but some things like text and maps look really good. Now, I would have of course preferred sharper, more pixelated text like that found in the original when upscaled, but the softer font used here does fit the quote-unquote HD look pretty well if I'm being honest. And I know I already talked about it, but SH3 is amazingly sharp in this collection. During cutscenes, it's easy to just sit back and marvel at how good it looks. But all of that sharpness does come at a price we'll talk about it a bit later. Okay, so there are a few compliments worth giving out here, but overall this HD remaster is an absolute mess graphically speaking. I wish it were just inaccuracies, because then I could admit that the fanboy in me resents the collection, but newcomers could play this version of the games and get a good approximation of what the originals were like. As we've seen though, it's not just inaccurate. These remasters break things that worked perfectly before and manage to ruin the look of the originals instead of improving it. And on top of that, the bastards had the gall to replace the font design with Comic Sans. Someone start a petition immediately. Actually, I don't really care about that as much as everybody else seems to. Yeah, it's kind of funny, but I don't know why everybody lost their mind over this. From the very start, it's clear that Tom Hewlett and his team had absolutely no idea what the hell they were doing. I mean, why did they work with unfinished PS2 code instead of looking to the PC versions both games already had? These ports could already hit HD resolutions, and it couldn't have been too hard to reverse engineer them. Well, I think we all know the answer to that question, but there's still a query that needs attention. Speaking purely from a graphical standpoint, should someone new to the series and looking to experience these games in a more modern HD light play the HD collection? And the answer is a very firm no. Not only do these games look worse than the originals, but they do so unnecessarily. HD versions of these games are already available on PC, and even the integrated graphics baked into my $70 Ryzen 2200G can handle them at 1080p. So no matter what you're rocking, it is almost assured you can play these games at a much higher level of fidelity than what's on offer here. So I'd say it's only fitting for you to avoid this collection with the same creative zeal and energy Team Hijinks puts into avoiding doing real work.
So, the hotel was your special place, huh? I'll bet it was.
Okay, so the graphics here are terrible, that's unquestionable, but a bad-looking game isn't the end of the world as long as it plays well, so I'm sure all of the lazy and poor decisions that went into up-resing the graphics didn't bleed over into gameplay, right? I mean, the game was already programmed and gameplay already existed, so all that's left is just to copy it over. There's absolutely no way they could have fucked up the gameplay, right? Well, the good news, or the bad news, depending on how you look at it, is the gameplay issues are spread pretty evenly across both of these games, but oddly enough, each game is broken in its own unique and interesting way. Starting off with 3, we see giant, and I mean giant dips from a max of 60 frames per second to what feels like lower than 20. Now, this might not have been so noticeable if the game was locked at 30 FPS, and believe me, the last thing I want is a game running at a slower frame rate, but when you drop 40 frames, it's much more of an issue than if you had only dropped 10. And when frames start dropping, prepare for slow motion, something I wish was a joke, but sadly is not. You'll find it does it at the most inconceivable times. Like here in this hallway, I was getting a lot of slowdown when these closers were on screen, but after I pass them, it gets even slower somehow. You've probably also noticed that there are random hangs where the game will freeze for just a split second. This actually happens a lot more the further into the game you get, and it never stops being annoying. Even here in an empty hallway with no 3D models on screen other than Heather, there are freezes, slowdowns, and some really odd-looking ghosting. Here in the subway, it seems the actual environment is causing both slowdown and ghosting, as you can see when I move the camera around. Now, the slowdown, aside from being absolutely ridiculous for a PS2 game running on a PS3, is a complete mystery. Sure, when resources get a little tight, some slowdown is going to happen, but there's no reason at all it should be causing ghosting, especially during a cutscene where only one character is on screen at a time. I can't for the life of me think of a situation where these two issues went hand in hand, but hey, don't you worry, the poor programming didn't forget to bless Silent Hill 2 with damn near game-breaking issues as well. And sure, slowdown is an issue here as well, but for some reason it's not quite as bad as we saw with Part 3. Instead of slowdown making the game hard to play though, it's a long, pointless fade to and from black that takes place anytime a cutscene is triggered, you look at your map or go to your inventory screen. An issue that was kind of present in the original, but the length has easily been doubled in the HD collection. Thanks to this, some cutscenes in the game are completely missing as they start and stop all in the amount of time it takes for the game to display graphics again. The biggest contender being the Pyramid Head introduction. This is a pivotal scene that represents Team Silent's theme of sex and death throughout the game, but a large portion of context is missing here as it takes so long to actually be able to see it. Now, of course, every black cloud has its silver lining, and for both of these games, I'm sure series vets will be able to appreciate the much shorter load times. Some doors in SH3 can take a little bit to load to the next room on real hardware, but the HD collection makes this a nearly instant process. Then again, this is often undone with long fades to black and terrible slowdowns, so it kind of evens out honestly. Regardless of which game you decide to play, the Silent Hill HD collection will serve as the absolute worst way to experience that game. I honestly had to force myself to play through these piles of trash, and that's really saying something. Both Silent Hills 2 and 3 are some of my absolute favorite video games of all time, and yet I kept making excuses not to play them. For example, I'm writing this sentence right now because I got to the subway station in SH3, saved the game, and decided starting a Word document would be a more entertaining use of my time. Listen, if the graphical screw-ups weren't enough to scare you away from this collection, I honestly hope the gameplay issues will, because I really do want you guys to play these games, but without a doubt, this bastardized remaster is not the way you want to do that. More than an HD collection, this game serves as a physical representation of what happens when a company lacking oversight teams up with a man with the world's largest ego. Well, so far we've covered the objective stuff, problems with gameplay, graphical shortcomings, and all manner of glitches, but Here's where we get subjective, and by subjective I mean personal. If you've watched the rest of my Silent Hill retrospective, you'll know these games really do mean something to me, especially Silent Hill 3. These characters, the world they live in, and the trials they go through are all very much a part of me, and I don't have a problem admitting this is when I get pissed. See, Tom Hewlett had a few other plans when pitching this HD remaster project to Konami. He wanted to hire all new voice actors and pen an entirely new script for them to read. Of course, re-rendering cutscenes with new lip syncing would have been impossible without the game's source code and some people who knew what they were doing. Two things sorely lacking on this project. So we decided to settle for replacing the voice actors of two games that were world-renowned for having an amazing voice cast. Now, I'll be the first to admit they didn't skimp on the VA budget. The voice of Joel from The Last of Us and all-around stud Troy Baker is here to voice James.
I'm looking for Mary. Have you seen her?
And Mary Elizabeth McGlenn, the absolute talent behind Major Kusanagi in the best anime ever aired on TV, Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, signed on as well. Guys, there's no getting around it. These are top-tier voice actors. They played some amazing roles, and I am without a doubt a fan of their work. That being said, they absolutely butchered this game. But before I go off on a tangent, let's talk about all the reasons they were needed at all. As the HD collection started to get press, James Sunderland's original voice actor, Guy Seehee, contacted Konami looking for money he believed he was owed. See, Konami only ever paid him for his initial work on the PS2 version of SH2, and this HD remaster would essentially be using his motion capture and voiceover work without compensating him. Of course, it is important to point out that residual income isn't really a thing in video game voice acting traditionally, but legally speaking, there is a precedent for it. Now, Konami does claim Guy signed a contract allowing them to do this, but Guy claims otherwise, of course. After this whole shit show hit the internet, the new voice actors went on attack, making sure everyone hated Guy for wanting to be, in my opinion, fairly compensated for his work. And what really killed it for me was how hard Mary Elizabeth McGlenn went after him. She made sure to bash him anytime she made a public appearance, and a lot of the times lied about the situation.
He said, you owe me 10 years of royalties. I'm gonna call the other actors. They're all gonna get royalties too, and we're gonna sue you, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, this was an artist I really respected. Her voice work was incredible, and her vocal talent on Akira Yamaoka's music just can't be denied. But in this one situation, she was very clearly in the wrong and acting kinda like an ass. Well, Guy would eventually decide to allow for the use of his voice and motion capture work, and even used his pull with the fans to push Tom Hewlett into allowing for players to have the option for new and old voices. Sadly, Silent Hill 3 did not have such a happy ending. For some reason still unknown, Part 3 would only have the new voice cast as an option, and, well, it's about time we get into that.
You gonna be okay alone?
I'm not a child, you know.
I'm gonna make a bold statement here. These very talented and impressive voice actors flat out suck in this game. Now, I know what you're thinking, and yes, this is the opinion of a biased fanboy, but I do have some more objective evidence to back these claims up, based on my experience sharpening my vocal chops here on YouTube and in recording/performing music live. So why not start out with the needless and ridiculous amount of reverb applied to every single spoken word in both of these games?
I just pricked myself.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Now, I'm no audio engineer, but reverb like this is only supposed to be used to simulate an environment that could cause such an echo, but I doubt very much an open graveyard filled with fog would cause a lot of natural reverb.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry. I was just...
No, it's okay. I didn't mean to...
Here in this tall, echoey entryway to the mall, reverb is totally acceptable and even expected. This open-air alleyway, well, not so much. Another issue I had was the way voices are dropped into a scene with no effort to blend them. Now, this was a problem I struggled with for a while. Something just sounded off and I had no idea how to describe it, but I think I've come up with something. Here, listen to this clip and try to pay attention to how well the voices blend in with the scene and the environment around them.
I'm on your side.
So you say, but how do I know you're not with her?
Her? You mean Claudia? Please don't lump me together with her. She was totally brainwashed by that crazy old hag.
Now the same exact clip, but with the new voice actors I'm recording.
So you say, but how do I know you're not with her?
Her? You mean Claudia? Please don't lump me together with her.
She was brainwashed by that crazy old hag.
See how the voices sound like they've been layered over the clip? It's almost like the original voices are actually coming out of the characters' mouths, but the new ones are just somewhere in the sound field. There's never a difference in volume when characters are further or closer to the camera either, and you're never really spatially aware of who's saying what. I'm sure this has to do with bad mixing, but it's almost like they layered the voices on top of every other sound, and it leads to what I can only describe as an old kung fu movie dubbed in English.
What do you want? Is that one-eyed bastard here? Who the hell are you? You dare call our boss that?
Compounding this issue is the terrible lip syncing you're gonna find.
James. Wait a minute. I'm kinda tired.
Now, obviously these new actors aren't going to be able to perfectly replicate the original pace and delivery of the old voices, so this was necessarily going to happen. But someone far more petty than I might point out this would be a very obvious argument against re-recording the voices in the first place. Now, sticking more in the realm of the objective, some of the voice actors were poorly cast regardless of their talent. Laura's voice makes it very, very painfully obvious we're listening to a woman in her late 30s act like a child, compared to the actual child who voiced Laura in the original.
What is it?
A letter from Mary.
What?
I want to go get it. Is that okay?
Yes.
And sadly, the same issue repeats itself with Heather. In the original, Heather sounded like a teenager. In the HD collection, she sounds like a grown woman trying to sound like a teenager and failing horribly.
A detective? Really? Well, nice talking to you.
For some reason, Troy Baker saw fit to drop into a deep, breathy low register plagued with awful sounding vibrato, and regardless of whether or not you like the way this sounds, it clearly doesn't fit James's look or build.
Can't open it?
Yeah. Maria, give me a hand here.
I almost feel like this was intentional since Mary Elizabeth has a naturally low voice and maybe she wanted a consistent sound to the two main characters. Who knows, honestly. All I know is these new voice actors, with almost no exceptions, do not fit the established characters they're coming out of. And yeah, if you haven't noticed, we have just crossed over into the realm of subjective fanboy anger. Aside from these voices not fitting their characters, they change the overall mood of the game. And I know that sounds dumb, but think about it. These voices were a pivotal aspect of the game's development. They were recorded after physically acting these scenes out for motion capture. They fit perfectly with the actions on screen because the same people perform those actions. No matter how talented the new cast is, they could never be as convincing given the circumstances. On top of this, these new guys sometimes deliver lines with totally new emotions, which really clashes with the feel of some scenes.
If I knew that, I wouldn't be so confused, would I?
If I knew that, I wouldn't be so confused, would I?
There's also a few small rewrites, and for the life of me, I can't imagine why Tom Hewlett would do this. I mean, here's a guy who claims to be the ultimate SH fan, thinking the series needs to be perfected, and by him no less. Very rarely does the guy cleaning paintings at a museum hold himself in as high regard as the original artist who made the works he's in charge of dusting off every night. And all of this isn't taken into account the nearly infinite amount of audio glitches, misplaced pieces of music, altered sound effects, and whatever the hell this is. Listen, I know Tom Hewlett got a lot of hate for what he's done to this series, and while I don't like the idea of people getting harassed, it's not exactly hard to see why that happened. He came to Konami with the idea of a remaster, but what he really wanted was a remake, and luckily the entire world laughed in his face as he failed to competently run a much smaller affair. The fact of the matter is, the HD collection is more than just a failed remaster. It's a slap in the face of every Silent Hill fan. Not only is every aspect of these ports better represented than PC versions of these games, but more accurately as well. Sure, there are some things that didn't successfully make the jump from PS2 to PC, but after what I played today, these may as well be perfect recreations carved in solid gold by comparison. No matter what you do or what your experience with the series is, please stay away from this collection. It is a work of pure hubris and incompetence. Not only does it sully what used to be a respected name in gaming, but also makes these games harder to pass on to future generations. I mean, think about it. Imagine your first time with a series was an experience not only marred with slowdown and weak voice acting, but design decisions and glitches so bad they can lock your console and corrupt your save data. Now, does that sound like a series of games that you're interested in further pursuing? Of course not. The Silent Hill HD collection has likely scared off more people from the series than antiquated controls in a dead genre ever will. So if you're looking to see me burn this game alive, well, here it is. This is an offensive piece of garbage that has no right having the word Silent Hill printed on its cover. A disc that would be better served acting as the lining of my cat's litter box than spinning in one of my consoles. And more than that, this was a terrible waste of what could have been an amazing event in video games. Something that could have brought back the survival horror genre. And I sincerely hope everyone involved in making it never find work in this industry again. May the Silent Hill HD collection go down in history as the worst Konami game ever made.
They're huge.
Will you stop?
Oh, god damn it. Well, that was depressing. Thanks for sticking around till the end, guys, and thanks for putting up with this very long rant session. If you're looking for less anger-inducing Silent Hill content, I'll have the rest of the retrospective linked here on screen. And if you like truly independent video game reviews, maybe think about visiting my Patreon page. If not, that's totally cool, but I do recommend you find someone you really do like and support their content, because this stuff's about to get a little harder than it used to be.